Okay, do I get rid of whose faces do I want to appear? Do we all appear at the beginning or what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Shall I mute you all?
Yeah.
And Mark, you can unmute yourself and start talking.
Yeah.
You need a green screen.
Well, I will in a minute.
Okay, so I'm going to start letting people in now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Hannah, you're in charge of muting. We're not unmuting ourselves and so forth. Is that right?
Yes, you can mute.
And
You
are
can mute
you
yourselves,
starting, Hannah, when are you starting to record?
It's recording now and people are coming in.
But
Welcome.
when did you start to record?
Just 2 minutes ago. Minute ago.
Okay, fine. Gosh, we got 49 people in already. Hi everyone, it's Mark Davis here. We're going to give people a few minutes just to come in. So I'll tell you in a second how things are going to work. Cool, we're on 55 people. Okay, so I'll give you a flavour of how the evening is going to work. We're going to go through a range of topics. Once we start, we are going to run until about 9 o'clock. We'll go through the list of topics. We've got some pre-questions that have been sent in advance. We won't go through them one by one. We'll take them as groups and prompt the people presenting those items with some of the questions they may have missed out. We will invite questions topic by topic on Zoom. There is a Q&A thing at the bottom of the screen, but don't put Q&A in yet. We'll do it topic by topic as we get onto each topic, and we won't be taking questions from the chat function. So if you do want to ask a question on the night, can't guarantee we'll get to it, but if you do, then there is a Q&A thing on the bottom. You can put it there, and we'll try and keep to a certain time. So we may not reach all your questions, but there may be time for further Q&A at the end. And if this goes really well, it is a bit of an experiment, then we might do it again soon. We will be recording this so that people can watch it, people who didn't manage to get onto it tonight. So I'll say that again in a minute. We're up to 77 people, and I think we've got something like 200 registered. So we'll give people a few more minutes, and I shall repeat what I just said. Okay, I shall repeat what I just said for the people who've joined since I finished it last time. We're going to start in a few minutes. We're going to give people time to come in. We're going to go until about 9 o'clock. We're going to go through a list of topics which will be introduced by different people. We've had questions sent in advance, and we'll go through those not one by one, but we'll sort of make sure that the questions that have been sent in advance have been pretty much covered. Then then there will be space to ask questions topic by topic. So, and Hannah will help on those. So if you have questions you want to ask on the night, you'll see there's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Once we get onto the topic, you can put some questions in there. Don't do it yet. Wait for the topic to come up. I'll go through the agenda in a bit. And if you want to ask questions, don't put them on the chat function, put them on the Q&A function. We can't monitor everything all at the same time. We may take Q&A at the very end, and if it all goes well and you still have outstanding questions, then maybe we can do this again soon. but we will be recording tonight, so people who haven't been able to see it will be able to watch it again. So Hannah, you're going to give me the nod when you reckon we're quora. We're just about 100 people. Okay, I'm taking that as thumbs up, as a yes, let's go for it. And it's pretty much 25 to, so let's go for it. So, good evening to all Don's Trust members who are online. My name is Mark Davis. For those of you who don't know me, I'm chair of the Trust. I'm going to go through the agenda in a minute, but I just wanted to say a few things first. So first of all, this is the first time we've done an online meeting for members. It's not a formal SGM. We may be able to crack how to do a formal SGM online, but let's start with an informal meeting and see how it goes. I've had apologies from a couple of board members, Anna and Anne, and a couple who I think aren't online yet, but I hope will be joining us. So Tim and Tim may be joining us, I hope. So the board members you have online at the moment are me, Jane Lonsdale, our Vice Chair, Hannah Kitcher, Graham Stacey, Luke Mackenzie, and then who have I missed? Edward Leake. And then the other people we have on the line, well, first of all is let me make a new introduction, which I shall ask to say hello in a second, which is a newly co-opted board member called Alistair Brown. And I'll ask him to say hello in a second, but we also have from the club, we have Joe Palmer, the Chief Executive, and Tom Rawcliffe, the Financial Controller. So actually, before I say a few more words, just to introduce Alistair, every year when we first meet as a board, we figure out what skills we're lacking and what perspectives we're lacking. And this year we felt we were a bit light on commercial skills, and Alistair came highly recommended to us as somebody with commercial skills. So Alistair sat in on a couple of meetings with us to see how it went, and either how it was for him, how it was for us. He had value to add, and so we have now co-opted Alistair. So Alistair, can you just say hello and tell people a bit about yourself?
Yeah, hello. What a great way to start the meeting, hey? So I guess for me, I'm supporter from Don's right from Division 4 the first time round. So like many of us, seen some ups and downs and a bit of a roller coaster around that one. But I'm really privileged and delighted to be asked to participate part of the Don's Trust board. A little bit of background of me, I'm a marketer by trade. I've worked in big corporates where I've kind of got on top of processes, but really the last 15 years or so has been around fast growth businesses, including at managing director and COO level. And really where I like to think I thrive is where I'm tasked with bringing commercial outcomes by putting in place clear strategies, making sure that the right people and process in place to deliver these. And that's the thing that excites me about this opportunity, is working at this hugely exciting time for the club, but also, a time that brings lots of challenges with us as well. And so helping to work with everybody to enjoy that journey, but also to bring us to that next level.
Great, thank you, Alistair. So before we get onto the agenda for this evening, I just wanted to say a few words about the current situation. Clearly, global and national events have overshadowed football over the last few months, really puts everything into perspective. So our thoughts go out, first of all, to fans who've been affected by coronavirus. Either they've suffered it directly, or maybe lost friends and relatives, or been in times of economic uncertainty and with doubts over their own jobs. So our thoughts go to fans who've been affected. It's undoubtedly put pressure on staff too. Some members of staff, at least one member of the club staff we think has had coronavirus. And some of you know that some staff have been furloughed, and it's put tremendous pressure on those who are still working, both because they're carrying the full workload of the club, and because the whole, there are other things we've had to contend with as a result of coronavirus, and we'll talk about those a bit. And for that matter, it's put pressure on board members too. We're having to balance our day jobs, our Don's Trust responsibilities, and our family lives. And we've had one board member who's had coronavirus. So it's been a difficult time for us too. So thank you for bearing with us. In terms of the agenda tonight, if I can find it, we're going to go through various topics. So we will start in a second with what's happened to football and AFC Wimbledon as a result of COVID, and Joe will doubtless unveil today's hot news for those of you who haven't yet heard, although I'm sure many of you have heard the latest. We'll talk briefly about ticketing, although there's more details that will come out over coming days. And when you choose the timing of these meetings, you never quite know how it'll coincide with everything being planned. So had it been a few days later, we might have had a bit more to say. We will, as ever, talk about the delivery of the new stadium. We'll cover financial topics. Then there'll be some overarching questions that you've asked us. And then we'll have some time for some general Q&A, and we've got a few parish notices at the end. So without further ado, we'll get onto the subject of what AFC has been happening in the world of AFC Wimbledon and football in the light of coronavirus. So I'll invite Club Chief Executive Joe Palmer to tell us what's going on.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to say it's good to see you all, but I obviously can't. But I hope you're all keeping safe and well and through this time. Yeah, obviously lot's been going on. I'm going to try my best to avoid using the word unprecedented. I'm sure you're all sick to death of hearing it, but it may slip in there. So apologies in advance for that. Also apologies in advance if one of my children runs in the background in their pants, which is also very possible. I've briefed them that they need to leave Daddy alone for a couple of hours, but that's not always the case. So yeah, again, apologies in advance for that. So really, sort of going back to where we are with COVID. We've obviously given you some updates of what was happening as to the best of our knowledge of what we knew, what was going on with the league. Been lots of ups and downs. I think the one thing that has been clear throughout all of this is the fact that there isn't a lot of clarity, and so things have been changing, quite a lot throughout this period in terms of what might happen with this season, what might happen with next season. So it's been quite intense, and obviously, as clubs, we've been meeting together with the EFL pretty much on a weekly basis, trying to go through this process to understand what's the best way to deal with the situation. And very much the EFL approach has been to take a kind of a strategy in sort of three directions. One is in relation to what we do now in terms of this season. The second one is then what is going to happen with regards to next season, and then the third strain is what's going to happen for the long term. And this is actually, I would say, is probably one of the more positive things that's come out of this process, is the fact that it has made the league finally really consider the situation surrounding financial controls of clubs and ensuring that clubs can maintain their sustainability. And we've undertaken some consultations with the EFL in relation to wage controls and that type of thing, which obviously will have a very positive impact on all of those clubs, because it will stop a lot of those clubs overreaching. And the sort of levels that we're discussing are well within our reach without overstretching. So, though they are positive ongoing discussions, and we look forward to further dialogue, and hopefully, there's discussion about some of them even coming into place next season, but certainly the season after that, which really will help a lot of clubs. So obviously today was all part of the first strategic strand. in terms of how do we deal with the current season. You will have all hopefully seen the news today. The vote took place on 2 counts. The first one was in relation to what mechanism clubs would vote for in order to curtail the season, and the second one was just, and that was amongst all 3 divisions, so Championship, League One, and League Two. The second vote in the afternoon was just for League One, to vote on whether they actually did want to curtail the season. I will say that in both circumstances, there was a very much vast majority, overwhelming majority on both votes. So effectively, the clubs and the league really did have spoken, in terms of what they wanted to do. So we now have the situation where the league is finished, and it's tough on some clubs, and that is unfortunate. But obviously, exceptional circumstances call sometimes for exceptional decisions, and it is very, very unfortunate. And we certainly don't revel in that in any way. But as you know, as we mentioned, that we were, from a financial point of view, absolutely, we felt it best for us to cancel. We very much want to stay in hibernation at the moment, to conserve our cash flows, because the costs for opening up and playing again this season were pretty big for a club of our size. We were estimating it somewhere between the 300 and 400,000, and that's not something that we felt we could stomach. So that ultimately was our motivating factor, and we've now seen a conclusion to that. So very much we are focused on next season. I'll be honest, that probably has been much of my focus throughout all of this, because we're in the middle of a stadium build, and the completion of that stadium is very dependent on what happens next season. So we now have that opportunity to focus more on that, and I hope to be able to update you all further down the line in terms of when a start date might be possible, what it looks like in terms of potential behind closed doors, or when we may be able to allow fans in. That again is something that we really don't know. We are hearing a lot of different things in relation to allowing fans to come into the stadium, potentially a little bit earlier than maybe have been projected. But again, with all of this, it's so much up in the air, and we're just going to have to wait and see what the government says, and then what in turn DCMS says, and then what in turn the league proposes. Certainly, it's going to be no easy feat with the requirements that we will have to undertake in terms of being prepared for not just a return to training, but also return to playing behind closed doors is very extensive. The document just for return to training was about 60 pages long, with a lot of regulations and requirements that we would have to undertake and to change what we would do on a daily basis. So it's not an easy task, and it will take up a lot of resource and ultimately still a lot of money. So we've still got a long road to go in terms of knowing where we'll be in terms of next season. And I guess sort of moving on more in terms of how that impacts on us for next season. Obviously, it will affect us massively. Our budget will be affected because we ultimately rely on matchday revenues, more so in Leagues 1 and League 2 than you do in certainly the Championship and Premier League. So to not have that income stream is quite painful. And we are having to look very carefully at our budgeting process. I'm sure Tom will tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But we have been looking at a number of different scenarios. So we took in consideration what it might look if we weren't playing in front of fans for the whole season, for part of the season, or another option of actually getting in sooner than we thought. So, we've had to look at different scenarios there, but either way, it's going to impact on our budget, and that also includes our playing squad. You know, we do have a number of players that are under contract at the moment, but like most clubs, have about 40% of our squad whose contracts are ending at 30th June. Across the league, there's going to be about 1,400 players who are going to be out of contract, and that's a pretty scary time for them and their families, I think, at the moment as well. So we must always consider that, and it's a challenging time. But that could also, obviously that will have an impact on the market potentially. And that possibly means that we will be looking at lower wages. We are seeing a little bit of that at the moment. So, we are looking at what sort of what a playing budget might look like, and what kind of playing squad that budget might be able to produce. It, in the worst case scenario, it's not particularly exciting, but I think I must stress that we're not the only ones in this situation, and there will be many other clubs who will also struggle to put together a very competitive playing squad. So in effect, you could have a bit more of a level playing field, but we won't know until we start to get closer to the start of next season and understand what sort of budgets people are looking to play with, and how active they've been in the market. But everyone, that certainly I've spoken to, they're talking about, the importance of loan players, but also the importance of utilising some of the younger players, something that we do already. So, there's a lot to think about. We are working on the basis of almost a worst case scenario, but ultimately, our challenge is to try and give Glyn a little bit of a better budget to step up to the next scenario, to see where we can overachieve, and that is our goal, and that's our job, and we're very steadily working towards that. But it's not an easy time, and I'll let Tom have say a little bit more here. But when we sort of come on to the next topic, I can obviously explain a little bit more about how we may overcome some of those issues.
Okay, thank you, Joe. So we will be coming on to financial issues later, so maybe we'll take that later. Can I just say to those who've asked questions so far, so some of them relate to COVID, as I said at the top, can you sort of save your questions for each topic, because we're not going to keep all our questions in mind for the later topics. So you've kind of covered, Joe, the questions we've had in advance on COVID, which were basically about finances. We've had some questions about safe distancing, but it's really hard. I think we're waiting to hear from the guidance on that. So I think there's probably not a lot we can say about exactly how safe distancing will work at the stadium at the moment. We've had a couple of questions online about how the club voted and the trust's role within that. So I think I'm right in saying, Joe, that the vote was confidential, but what I can say is that there was a dialogue between Joe and the Dons Trust board of this issue as the weeks have gone by. So it's not like it was the way the club voted was a surprise to the Dons Trust board. So I won't ask questions that aren't about COVID now before we move on, although there is one cheerful question from Martin Fullard about, is it likely that there'll be a 2021 season at all? If most clubs can't afford to turn out behind closed doors, then it becomes untenable. So do you have a view on that one, Joe, before we move on?
Yeah, it's a pretty frightening scenario. No, absolutely. I mean, I think that, the dialogue that we're hearing in the meetings is that there will be one. I think the thought of not having a football season, I think, is too much to bear, and I think even the government even understands that, and they are working very closely with all sports, not just football, to ensure that there is that opportunity, and there are a lot of scenarios being thrown, particularly in regards to how we could not just start behind closed doors, but in terms of how we could potentially play with a limited number of fans in the stadium as well. So there's all kinds of scenarios being thrown about at the moment, and no doubt we'll go through the process and try to figure out which ones we're capable of doing and undertaking. But I think that there will be a season. I have no doubt about that. There's too much money riding on football, and also it's something that the government realises is incredibly important. You know, in terms of entertaining the masses. You know, sport is essential, essential form of entertainment. And actually, I think the government would have, you know, from the point of view of keeping people entertained during lockdown, they would have loved to have had sport on TV. And that was one of the driving factors for them, certainly, to try and get the Premier League back up and running. So I think the motivation is there to play in front of crowds. So I'm certain it will do.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. Can we look at the ticketing? We've had lots of questions about ticketing, how season tickets will work next year, how people will be able to choose their seats, whether seats come automatically, you know, pre-allocated, questions like that. Joe, what can you tell us about ticketing for the coming season?
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of questions, as you say, Mark, and understandably so. You know, there's a lot of discussions about that, and everyone wants to know what it's going to be like, what the packages will be like, what prices the season tickets would be. I think we've been thinking about this long and hard over the last couple of weeks about how, you know, since COVID started, and about how we solve this issue, because ultimately one of the issues is, as I said, match day, not having those match day revenues is key, and season tickets is obviously a big contributor to that. So one of the things that I have noticed is that a lot of people, and this is fantastic, is I've seen a lot of people saying, look, you know, we're happy to continue paying for our season ticket throughout next season, and that's, you know, that's terrific. But I think our only issue with selling season tickets right now is from the budgeting point of view, is that we don't know how many games that we would have to potentially refund, you know, based on those season ticket sales. And that then makes budgeting, particularly in relation to saying to Glyn, you've got this playing budget, you know, very difficult. So from that point of view, you know, we need to find a way of replacing that as much as possible. And I really can't stress that enough. So what we needed to do is to try and create something that's meaningful and that will give something back to the fans. Because obviously, you know, otherwise if we're just asking for season ticket money that you might not be watching. So what we spent a lot of time internally going backwards and forwards on how we can create something that is meaningful and actually gives something to fans. And one of the things we've looked at is a debenture program, but that's without the typical debenture price tag, if you like. And, you know, I think what we think this can do is, you know, we need to create something that, you know, you'll value and that also has value. So, you know, what we're going to do is we are going to present at the end of this week. We hope to come out with a consultation that will outline the proposal on a debenture scheme, and there are some variables that we can change, but ultimately we really need your help in giving us feedback on that, because we want to give you something that you know, resonates with you and has value for you. So we really want to hear from you, because I can't stress enough, this has to work. We really need this scheme to have an impact, and to be able to generate income. And obviously with the debenture scheme, we're actually future selling the product. The idea is that this product would last for 10 years. So it has longevity, and it's not just about the next season. So, you know, we hope as many of you as possible will participate in that scheme. Like, as I said, we hope to get that. I'm just finalising that, because we had some issues in terms of getting some of the points more clearer to make sure everyone understands, and that should be coming out towards the end of the week, and then shortly followed by the details of the season tickets, their prices, the different packages, where we can sit, that type of thing. So as I said, I know there's a lot of questions about it. We are really right there. There's a lot of stuff that's been developed and created in the backgrounds and is ready to go out. But this is really essential. You know, we really do need to somehow find that match day revenue, or a replacement for it. And we hope that this scheme will do just that. So please do let us know. Like I said, if it's not something that everyone is in agreement with, we'll have to go back and rethink, or change some variables within it. But you know, we really want everybody to buy into it and to be something that has value for everyone. So yeah, please do look out for that and do participate.
Okay, so thanks for that. So watch this space, in other words. We've had a few questions. So there are some of the questions that we've been asked that we can't really say much more about. Watch this space, become clear what at least we're thinking about over coming days. But there were a few questions that I think we can pick up. So one is just quite interesting question that about whether people will be able to access iFollow to the extent that matches are played behind closed doors. Do we have a view on that one, Joe?
Yeah, so the idea certainly, when the discussions were still going on regarding the current season, the idea was that, you know, if it was to be played on, that all games would be broadcast or streamed over iFollow. I believe that is still the case for next season for all games that are played behind closed doors. We actually haven't had an update on that for some time. I know that there was a number of issues relating to whether that was going to be possible, how they could improve the production. Obviously, that's going to take up a lot more bandwidth to what they currently the service provides. Yeah, there was quite a bit of discussion going on there, and also whether there would be a reduction in price as well for fans. So as soon as I hear any more from the EFL regarding iFollow, I will update people. But as I said, the view certainly was that behind closed doors matches will be streamed live on iFollow.
Okay, and we also had a question about disabled fans and how they might be able to choose their seats, and whether, you know, the ambient disabled might be able to access from the back of the stand. So
yeah, absolutely. So I've actually got a conference call tomorrow afternoon with Jess Barnes to run through the latest accessibility plans for the stadium. So we've literally only back in the last week, received the final drawings and plans for the semi-permanent stands, and obviously that includes the accessibility provision around those. So now that I have the full picture of what accessibility provisions that we have throughout the entire stadium, we will. I can now have that conversation with Jess and Amanda to just go over to see if there's any gaps, to make sure that we've got as much provision as we can, and then to be able to present that back to the accessibility groups, hopefully that we've covered as many areas as we can. There's certainly some very exciting things in there that you won't find at other stadiums, including a changing places room, which was something that we decided to add in because we thought it really does add a huge value for us. So yeah, I certainly will update you, but absolutely there are a range of accessibility provisions, including wheelchair and ambulant provisions. Yeah, all good news.
okay, so I'm going to move us on. There are some great questions in the Q&A, and so some of them don't relate to ticketing. So as I said earlier, just save them up topic by topic. We'll have some general Q&A at the end, but we do need to move on. So the next question is about the delivery of the stadium. I mean the delivery of the stadium. We'll come on to the financing of the stadium after that. But again, Joe, tell us how the stadium is being delivered.
Yeah, I don't know where to start really. A lot of you have seen the images, and the stadium really is starting to take shape. One of the most exciting bits, I guess, is the pitch, which is actually going to start seeding well, I think the back end of this week. Many of you may not know that we are going with a stitched pitch, which is an incredibly exciting situation. It just means that we're enable us to host more games, enable us to potentially look at ground share options in the future, do more training on there. So it really will be one of the best pitches in League One, without a doubt, and we've got that at an incredible deal. So yeah, really exciting, and obviously watching that grow really makes you feel like there's turf on the ground and grass on the pitch. So you know, it's very real. There's a lot of block work going in. You can actually walk into the proposed toilets on the first floor concourses. The cladding's up, and if you will seen the multicoloured cladding on the front of the stadium that faces Plough Lane. So yeah, it's really moving. I know there were some questions in relation to the completion date. Yes, we had just literally before COVID moved forward to the back end of August in terms of our completion date, but obviously COVID's arrival then made that slip back to what it was actually the original completion date. So a bit of a shame, but you know, it's not anything drastic because we had only just thought that we were moving forward. So yeah, everything's still on target with that regard. So what else have we got here? So some questions about the semi-permanent stands. These are, as I say, semi-permanent. They're not temporary, and they will create an entire bowl around the stadium. So we have the main west stand, and it will then be continued by the semi-permanents in a perfect bowl. So there's no open corners. So it really will feel enclosed and hopefully creates a far better atmosphere. So again, very exciting about that. I think there's some questions in relation to safe standing. So yeah, this is a conversation that's probably been going on for almost 6 months now. I've been talking very closely with the SGSA and also the FSIF, who are the group that provide us with the grant. And ultimately, we're looking at a solution and looking at a way that we can put in safe standing at the new ground. We are getting very close on a decision on that. The SGSA has undertaken a report throughout the season on some of the test sites that they have around the country and what they've seen throughout Europe. And they are putting that report to the FA, the DCMS, the Football Foundation, the FSIF, and we then hope as a result that we will get the support to be able to put the safe standing in without losing our grant. So we actually should know within a few weeks. So that would be an exciting development again. I know it would be very welcome to a lot of fans. So yeah, we are very hopeful that we will see a positive outcome there. In terms of social distancing, how that might work in the new stadium, I actually had a conversation with one of our own fans earlier in the week about that, who works for an organisation that is looking at proposals and schemes to help clubs manage social distancing in stadiums. Obviously, a lot depends on the changes that might happen with regards to whether it's 2 meters or whether it comes down to 1 meter. And that obviously will have a big impact about where how we can organise people in the stands. Obviously, I mentioned earlier about the possibility that we could be looking at fewer numbers or lesser numbers of people into the stadium It's not something I'm a fan of, because I don't exactly want to go through the process of choosing who should and who shouldn't come into the stadium. It's not going to be an easy task, but let's see when we get to that, and whether that's actually a real option. Just looking at some of these other questions.
There's a question about cycling, Joe.
Yeah, I was just about to say, there's some interesting questions about cycling provision. Yes, we have an obligation from our Section 106 planning condition that we need to provide 100 bike parking spaces. We are currently looking at options for this within the stadium demise itself, and these would be secured storing provisions. Whether that's got, there will be some CCTV that looks onto the outside, but ultimately they have to be safely stored away, because there are regulations around bikes being used as weapons. Yeah, they can't just be lying around anywhere. They would have to be stored away safely. So we absolutely are looking at that, and I know that we're looking at a consultation within a couple of weeks following the debenture one that looks more at this sort of match day experience, and several of the questions relate to how people are planning to get to the stadium, what mode of transport, which transport hubs they might use, or whether they come by bike. So again, it'll be really good to get people's feedback to understand whether that provision is in line with that, or whether we may look to try and up it if we think that there'll be more requirement for it. But absolutely, yes, cycling is a part of that. You'll all understand the situation down on that part of Wimbledon. Traffic-wise, it's not the greatest, and we certainly don't want to encourage a huge amount more, certainly car-borne traffic. And I know the council is very keen for us to be encouraging more people to come by public transport where possible, and obviously cycling would fall into that category, and not to mention the environmental credentials around doing that. So that's something that we absolutely want to follow. So yeah, good question.
A couple more before we move on. So one was a question that a few people have asked about, the completion date and what that means for how we'll play matches in the early part of next season. Another interesting one is a question that has been asked whether a stitched pitch means that the ladies could play there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, a stitched pitch basically means that we can have more load on it. So whether that's the ladies team, or hosting some friendlies, it might be an England under 21 friendly, for example, or women's England team matches. I mean, it could be anything, but having that pitch gives us the option, which is what's so great about it. And also having a really nice playing surface. So I think a lot of teams will come and enjoy playing there. But, yeah. What was the other question?
The other question was about the completion date is 23rd of October. What does that mean for where we'll play?
Yeah, so this is obviously quite a key question for me at the moment. Again, as I said, so going back to what I said earlier about how this is so fluid at the moment, and things are moving about, and there is uncertainty in terms of what the eventual outcome will be. On that basis, we are following a number of different strategies and options to keep things open. One of the main ones is that we would be able to possibly start the season behind closed doors at Plough Lane. Ultimately, why would we want to pay to play somewhere else if we're able to play at the new stadium? The reason for that is that the pitch will be ready in time for the proposed start date. In fact, it would be ready well ahead of that. So there is that opportunity, given that there will be no fans in there, and the stadium doesn't need to be entirely finished, that we'll be able to start the season behind closed doors at the ground. So yeah, that's one scenario. The other scenario is that if we are hearing, and we may, I'm hearing a lot of things at the moment, that we could be playing in front of crowds a bit earlier. We've very much sort of been told until recently that it might not be until January, but we have heard some other murmurings that it could be sooner, could be October, which may mean that we need to consider the ground sharing option again. So we are looking at those. We have spoken to a number of clubs, to keep that option open should we need it. There's also the option that we could end up, depending on the timing of letting fans in, but that we play a few of those games away first and still play in Plough Lane. So, like I said, there's a number of options here, and we just don't know until we get a little bit closer.
Okay, there are tons more questions about stadium delivery, but we are going to need to move on. So there hopefully will be time for more questions at the end. So I'm going to move us on. I'm going to give Joe's voice a rest. We're going to get on to financing. So we're going to ask Edward to say a few words, answer some questions about the financing of the stadium. And we'll ask Tom to say a few words about, the operational finances of the club, picking up on questions we've been asked. So Edward, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, hello.
Speak up a bit though.
Oh, hold on. Can you hear me all right, Mark? No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello.
Go ahead, Edward.
Okay, right. Good evening, everybody. Right, so about the stadium finance. I guess a couple of the questions have come up in the Q&A, which I put very quick answers for. But to cover the main topics, we've just signed the construction contract, which you will all have seen. There's still a much smaller gap in the funding. We need £3 to £4 million still, which in the context of the total project is just under 10% of the overall cost. And the way of funding that plan A really is still to get the commercial loan. We have signed a term sheet with a lender, and we're looking to close that loan if we can by the end of June. It's been quite a long, drawn-out process. There's been a lot of due diligence on their side. We think we've answered all the questions, but it's still a commercial negotiation, so it could take longer than we expect. If we are successful with that loan, it's really important that everybody understands it's a pretty short-term loan. It's an 18-month bridge loan, so in 18 months we have to pay it back with interest. And find some way of paying that back. And the amount that it'll be, £3 to £4 million, is not money that we can save out of the ordinary budget of the club. So we would have to find a way either through more fundraising or more bonds of doing that. But we're pretty close on that now. The other option that we have, and we're still looking at in earnest, is selling more shares. We've got authority from the members to sell shares until the Dons Trust has 75% plus one of the votes. So that leaves us, after the recent issues to Cedars and to Nick Robertson, with around about 8% of the votes that we can still sell, which, if we do it at the same valuation that we did with Cedars and with Nick, would be another £2 million or so. So that's another a much cheaper way, I guess, of bridging the gap for the rest of the stadium finance.
Okay, great, thanks. So there are some follow-up questions, but maybe first I'll ask Tom to say a few words about the operating finances, which is one of the questions.
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. On the operational side, obviously, COVID-19 has not been good for us, not been good for the football world, not been good for the sporting world. It won't be a surprise to many of you, and I think we've discussed it before, that we budgeted to lose £1 million in the 2020 season, which was funded from the sale of Kingsmeadow, our old stadium, to Chelsea. Remember, we were very, very close to budget. We were slightly ahead, only by a couple of thousand, but that's good to hit that budget and expecting to lose that £1 million over the course of the season. However, obviously, the coronavirus hit, which is something I suspect very few people budgeted for or forecasted. and that resulted in us not playing the remaining 4 home games we had scheduled. The impact of this and losing money from the matchday ticket sales, the hospitality, was in excess of £100,000. So a budgeted loss, just looking at those 2 things, would go from £1 million to over £1.1 million. However, we did sell one of our youngsters, Leo Castledine, to Chelsea in March, which certainly helped the short term and helps to mitigate that unexpected loss of £100,000. And also, we really benefited and thankful that so few of you requested a season ticket refund. I think less than 3% of our season ticket holders, and that makes a massive difference, and that can't be underplayed how important that is. Looking forward and looking to what we'll have in the bank at the end of this season from an operational basis, we've also received an unsecured loan from the Football League. So that's been in the papers, very separate from the loan Edward was talking about on the stadium budget. We've also applied and were successful for the unsecured bounce back loan, which will be paid back over 6 years, and the Football League loan will be paid back over 3 years. We've also had a very small grant from Kingston Council as a result of being in the leisure industry and our rates bill being within the relevant threshold. And we'll also benefit over to the tune of comfortably over 6 figures from furloughing our staff, and that does include our players, and it includes a lot of our backroom staff. So that's why Joe was mentioning earlier, the cost of coming back to complete and finish this season would have been between £300,000 to £400,000 when we sat down and looked at it, of which a large proportion would have been the money lost from not being able to furlough the players. So certainly taking aside anything else from a financial perspective, ending the season was really quite good news for me in the accounts office. Looking further ahead into next season, as Joe said, it's going to be very tough. There is no hiding away from that. So the money we have in the bank, which we benefited from the loans and the grants, will be used to help fund next season. But the problem we have, as so many businesses will have, not just restricted to football, is where there is so little certainty, such little certainty over what income we will get next year. As a result of having that lack of certainty, and for instance, we don't know yet what funding we will receive from the Football League and the Premier League. Last season that came to around £2 million, and we just don't know, it's not been confirmed yet, what we will be receiving. As a result of having such little income, we have no choice but to cut back on our costs and reduce costs wherever we possibly can. And this will include reviewing our staffing structure. We have to protect the future of the club, and it's important then for us to have the lowest possible cost base which we can function with moving forward. We have budgeted very cautiously for next season. As Joe said, there were different options we explored. We explored the worst possible option of having no season at all. We explored looking at playing the whole season behind closed doors. Looked at playing the season behind closed doors until January, and we looked at the best case scenario, which would be a miracle cure overnight, and everyone can get in the ground, and there's business as normal. So we'll be going on the more cautious approach, in the belief that it's easier to ramp up and spend money if we need to from a low cost base than it would be to turn the tap off when we're expecting something to happen, expecting income to come in, which doesn't come in. So it's very, very difficult. And as Joe alluded to, this obviously impacts the playing budget. We have players who are contracted to us, and really the playing budget isn't much more than those players and trying to get a team out with very little extra funding spent. So it's going to be difficult. And going back to what Joe said, that's needs to be taken into context. Lots of other clubs, certainly our side, will be struggling, but it's certainly not looking great. And as Joe alluded to, with the season tickets and the match day tickets not coming in, we lose a hell of a lot of money from that side of things. What can we do to try and plug that gap, and what can we offer which will help us next season? So it will be very difficult for us, but we can't spend what we don't have, and we will need fan support with this yet again. But if we make the tough decisions and stick to our budget and cash flows, then we have the opportunity to get through this.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom. So there are some questions on the financing of the stadium. I'll start with a couple of questions on the debt side, and then I'll go to a few questions on the equity side. So there's a question in the sidebar about why, you know, we're going for a development bridging loan, essentially. Why not go for a term loan? And then there's a question, no one's asked it, but I'm going to ask it. Is the Plough Lane bond still open for subscription, Edward? I couldn't possibly not ask that question. So do you want to answer those, Edward?
So on the long-term loan, I just typed a quick response to Laurent, but it's a good point. I mean, the best way to do this would be, and this is why we're getting a bridging loan, would be to get a loan in order to complete the stadium. And then once we can show lenders that the stadium is complete and it's operating and there's a sound business behind it, then we'd be in a better position to get a longer term loan. So that's absolutely right. The only thing I'd say, we haven't been successful so far in persuading lenders to lend to a lower league football club. And that there aren't an infinite number of lenders that would look at lower league football clubs as a good credit. So it is a possibility, and there are some, especially some long-term loans backed by the ownership of the stadium, which we think lenders will look at after completion, but it isn't a slam dunk. It's not guaranteed that we'll be able to do that.
And is the Plough Lane bond open, Edward?
The Plough Lane bond is open, yes, of course.
Oh, great.
I shouldn't be speaking on behalf of the Plough Lane bonds, but the idea is that we don't want to have too many mixed messages and too many mixed fundraising messages at the same time. So as we start to shift towards the operating budget for next year and what we may be asking people to do in terms of tickets and other things for next year, it didn't seem right also to be asking in a heavy campaign for contributions to the Plough Lane bond. But it's open and it's still a part of the long-term plans for the club, and it's still, you know, by far the cheapest form of finance that we found, and the way that gets members most engaged as well.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to move on to a few equity questions. So the first set of questions. So people will have seen that we've had a whole load of questions about how the Cedars shares work, and the club's put out something on the official website today. I think it's gone on the Cedars site today, answering some of the questions that have been most commonly asked. I think a lot of those questions actually were answered during the initial campaign, but you know, it was some time ago, and understandably memories fade of those things. I think probably the one you might want to touch on, Edward, because it's come up a couple of times, is just about who votes the Cedars shares when it comes to a shareholder vote of AFCW PLC.
So Cedars votes those shares, but before people get upset about that, just remember they're only voting on shareholder matters of AFCW PLC, and really, I mean, there are a number of theoretical scenarios where we may need a shareholders vote, but essentially it comes down to when we issue shares, it needs a shareholders vote. Now, the Dons Trust controls more than 75% of the votes in AFCW PLC, so that the outcome of those votes is a foregone conclusion. So it's not a democratic issue. The vehicle for democracy in the club is the Dons Trust. AFCW PLC, these are corporate plumbing votes, if I can put it that way.
Thanks for that. And I suppose the only point I'd add to that is that, you know, in exactly the same way as when we calculate the trust control of the club previously, we've always looked, even though a lot of the shares that have been owned not by the trust are owned by friendly fans, if you like, we've always looked at it as being other than the trust and a third party. And so the fans that aren't, the shares that aren't held in the Dons Trust aren't viewed as part of, you know, they're viewed as third party shares when we calculate that 75%. Then, so I'd encourage people to look at today's website announcement, which talks about some of the mechanics of share certificates and the names in which they're held, etc., etc. But I think we'll move on from that and ask about the equity investment we've received from Nick Robertson. There've been a fair few questions about that some have come in today, but I think probably the underlying question is sort of what does he get that others don't get by virtue of owning 10% both of the club in terms of the financial stake and the votes.
I mean, there is an argument that if people put in a lot of money, then it's very hard to sell large chunks of shares and tell people that they don't get a vote. Now, what they're voting on is what I just described with Cedars. It's not that meaningful whilst the Dons Trust is in control of more than 75% of the votes. But nevertheless, I think telling people that are putting in £2.5 million that they don't get a fair vote on these things is really difficult. With Cedars, we had a good conversation about it, and they accepted that. But Cedars have some other contractual rights which got them comfortable that the Dons Trust will play fair. And so with Nick, that was really always part of the deal. And with other possible investors that we've been talking to out of the shares that are available to sell, it's been a fairly common theme that people that are putting in a lot of money want a fair vote with their shares.
Okay, thank you. And then a couple of other questions on the subject. One was why Nick didn't put his money into the bond, and then whether his funding is for the stadium or whether we're taking his money for the playing budget.
So it's a good question about the bond. If you want to help the club in the very long term and participate in the success of the club and the growth of the club, then the way to do that is to buy shares. Loans get repaid in the end, and we'll see as we kind of roll forward with the Dons Trust bond that those loan repayments they'll start to become an important part of the club's budget. So by far the best way to help the club is to buy shares. Certainly if you're looking at the very, very long term. And the other thing is, I think that he doesn't want the money back. He wants to be a part of the club and wants to be to share in the success of the club, just as people that put money into Cedars also want to share in the success of the club and are not looking for a repayment.
Okay, so thank you for that. So we've got about half an hour left to go, and we've got some overarching questions. So I'm going to move us on. We can come back at the end to some general Q&A if we've got time. So some of the overarching questions we've had, and we've actually had a couple of great ones online in the chat while we've been online. But I'm going to ask Jane to answer some of these. So there's one about, following the experience of the last 18 months, which have been quite a testing time for us. What changes need to be made in which the club, the board, and the PLC and board and the Dons Trust board operate? And do we see a need for change? What's it look like? How do you bring it about? So Jane, do you want to say something about that?
Sure, thank you. And hello, everybody. And apologies if you see people wandering in and out of my kitchen. I don't have a study or anything, so you might well see Joe family members going to the fridge. And there's been some as well on the chat, which I'll pick up as well, about Imperial College. So the last 18 years has been busy. It's got increasingly more busy. And it also plays into a point that somebody's talked about, how busy the board members are. And there's different models for that. And I've spoken about this before, that personally I use working groups. And I, as Mark indicated at the very beginning, I'm one of the board members who have been impacted quite significantly with my workload, my paid work. I work for the Treasury. And so since COVID hit, it's been, the word I'm going to use is relentless with work. So my time for board stuff has been a bit impacted as well. And so how does our structure serve us? Well, so it probably doesn't serve us correctly right now. And we are starting to look at that. We were approached by Imperial College, who have got a group of MBA students doing a research project for us. And their terms of reference, somebody's asked about the terms of reference, is talking about research into the governance structure of other fan-owned sports club, in-depth field research with existing stakeholders of AFC Wimbledon. They're doing some financial valuation of the club. They're looking at the corporate governance structure of non-sports business related to private limited companies. And then the report will aim to document any recommended changes to the corporate governance structure of the club that they think is achievable and sustainable in the long term whilst retaining the fan ownership model. Many of you will have heard me talk about fan ownership and that it's massively important to me as a board member before. And so that's not the only thing, obviously, and we will need to, and we will be engaging with our members on that, and even before we have to, which is in line with the restricted action. So any change that would be obviously dependent on restricted actions would have to come to members anyway, but we would want to engage with you before then. What else can I say about it? So the structure has kind of evolved over time and is doing more. The PLC is meeting more than it did. So it didn't used to meet at all for many years, and actually it's got a role and a function to do with the finance of the club and the oversight, and the John's Trust should really be doing the strategy, and we kind of keep getting dragged into doing more other stuff. You know, Mark's leading the stadium committee group, and we're ended up doing more stuff like that, that in my opinion we need to go back to setting the strategy of the club and concentrating on the aims and aspirations of the club.
Okay, thank you, Jane. There's been another set of questions sort of about, I'll roll them together on strategy and survey. I mean, we did a survey back in, sorry, a strategy back in 2009-ish, 2009-10-ish. Has the time come to work with the membership to elicit a new set of objectives now that we've actually accomplished a lot of the objectives, or close to, that were in our previous ones? So something about strategy, and then also how do we going to survey our members about what they want for this football club? Yeah.
Cool. So setting the strategy, as you say, we've been. You know, I remember talking on certain podcasts about, you know, what was our aim, and it was to get back in the league in 10 years, and you know, people laughed at us because it was something we kind of pulled out of thin air, and all of the things that we said we would do, we have done, and it's only a very short time now until we actually move into Plough Lane. Which I'm very looking forward to. On setting the strategy, we started that conversation last summer with some small strategy sessions in and around Wimbledon. Anna was leading on that experience. And then we agreed it as a priority as a board. We set our priority every year, and we agreed it as a priority of our board back in February this year. We then immediately went into COVID response, and we reprioritised a bit. It's still our aim to do this strategy. It's really important to understand what our members want, because ultimately we're representing your views. And you know, when we've asked fans in the past and members in the past, it helps us as a board to be able to meet those demands, if you like. That's not the best way of saying it, but I'm sure you get what I'm saying. And so and as part of understanding what our members want, to me, it makes sense to do, you know, a membership survey would certainly help me in understanding the views of membership, and keeping it up to date is hugely beneficial. We are putting together a calendar of fan engagement, which is sort of, you know, fan engagement of surveys and things across the year. Graham's working on that. And hopefully we'll have something for discussion at the DTB for next month. And then I think there was also something about elections. Somebody, a question we had in to start with was about elections, which was they'd like to see all candidates standing for the DT board to include in their manifesto response a set of, you know, how they stand against those objectives. I think on the elections, it's really the election steering group oversee that, and they have to be independent of the board. Otherwise, we could have huge influence over what can and can't go in, and makes it very unfair and not a level playing field. And so, I would encourage all members to when we're running an election, to question the candidates. There's hustings run each year, the 9 years do interviews, send questions into that, and make sure that you know what the answers are to the questions that you have, if it's not already in their manifesto.
Okay, so there's another question which I'm going to ask and I'm going to answer that somebody sent in. We've had a couple of questions of a similar ilk, but basically the members of the boards who recommended the potential loss of the control should consider their positions given their complete misreading of the views of the majority of the membership. So I want to talk to that. I think that's probably aimed at me, possibly. So the thing to say is this. There are several of us on the Don's Trust board who are on the stadium committee and have had the role of overseeing the development of the stadium and the financing of the stadium. And that's quite a tough project. It's actually a huge commitment the club and the membership bit off on when the membership instructed the board to go and relocate, you know, to Wimbledon. And we've worked tremendously hard on it. We've got more right than wrong, and we've had to make some pretty tough calls over the last year or two. One of the tough calls we had to make right early on was, do we keep going with the project, or do we wait until we've committed all the finance before we put a shovel in the ground? And we'll never know. But my suspicion is there is no perfect solution to committing debt and equity for an organisation of our description at a time when you don't have a construction contract, quote, and keeping all those live and getting them all done. It was pretty much an impossible circle to square. So we moved ahead. We moved ahead in the expectation that our loan broker was telling us that we would succeed in raising the debt. And that proved to be a much more challenging process than we expected. The second point to make is that so we got to a point when we were in a tight spot, and we did have other options open to us. We didn't, and I've described this some months ago, we didn't go out and positively court options for selling control of the club, and none of us set out with the intention of selling control of the club or had any desire to do so, but we were in a tight spot. I think the thing that we misjudged was the potential of the Plough Lane bond. I mean, I remember thinking this time last summer, you know, we'll do a top up of the Don's Trust bond, and I reckon it will make sorry, this is me speaking. It'll make £250,000, something like that. We'll mop up a bit of money we didn't manage to get through Cedars. It didn't strike me in a million years that we could ever raise £5.25 million through it. And if it had, we'd have maybe done things differently, but hindsight is a wonderful thing. So the Plough Lane bond did come along. Congratulations to those who suggested it and who pushed it through, and it helped tremendously, and we'd be in a difficult spot without it. I mean, the thing I would say is that if the Plough Lane bond hadn't come along, we were right that we were in a really tough spot with and that we had to consider some really drastic options in the circumstances we were in, because we have continued to push for conventional loan finance for this stadium, and it has taken us months and months and months since then. And as Edward said earlier, you know, we're in advanced stages of due diligence now, having signed a term sheet. But boy, was that a journey, and we haven't signed it yet. So taken in the round, the short answer to the question is we've got more right than wrong. We've rolled with the punches. We've had to confront some controversial situations, but I don't propose to resign over that issue, no. So that's that question. And then we've had a question about where do each of the Dons Trust board members stand on the need to protect and maintain the restricted actions that ensure the Trust owns and controls the football club. So I will turn in a second to all other board members, but I will probably excuse a board member who's been a board member a single day unless he positively desires to speak on the subject, because that would be a bit of a tough gig. He hasn't had all the induction materials yet. I'll start with my own answer to it, which is that the restricted actions, they're not perfect. When I was working on the restricted action to sell Kings Meadow, what was it, nearly 5 years ago, with the then Trust Secretary, you know, you think you understand them, and then you read the real detail of them in order to implement them, and there's sort of, you know, you have to take, they're not perfect, but they kind of do a job. They do a job of putting some really major decisions in the hands of the membership where they belong. So I support, even though, you know, they can be cumbersome and awkward, and we've had to use them a couple of times now, I support their existence. One restricted action we don't yet have is that actually selling Plough Lane isn't yet a restricted action. I would expect that we should do something about that at some stage as part of our constitutional cleanup. Once we've settled enough about, you know, giving security in the stadium to secure the financing, etc., then there probably needs to be a restricted action relating to Plough Lane. So that's my view. I'll turn to Jane, and then I'll turn to other board members that I can see are online, see what their further views are.
I'm really sorry, Mark. I was in the middle of typing a response to somebody on the thing. What's the question? This is the final
I will come back
about...
to you, Jane.
Thank you.
I will come back, and I will ask the next person down the list what Hannah's views on restricted actions are.
Hello. Hopefully you can all see me. My views are that I stood, and I've said this, I believe, at previous meetings, that I've stood to represent what is a fan-owned club and what makes us special and unique. I feel like we've, really demonstrated that not we as the Dons Trust board, but the wider fan membership and fan base, what a fan-owned club can achieve. And ultimately, I stand by that and support that. Not that being said, I also do feel, and I strongly found myself strongly nodding along to all the words written on the blog post that was done on the Wimbledon Way blog post, all about basically the changes that need to happen. That changes do need to happen, but this needs to be done with members and transparently in order to ensure that the Dons Trust remains, its capacity for oversight and governance is really sound.
Okay, so Jane, you've heard now the question was about where you stand on restricted action. Do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, so for me, it protects us and as a fan-owned club. And whilst it might be very difficult, and I'm sure whoever wrote the Constitution way back in the day, and had all of the restricted action A and restricted action B and the different voting rights and how we make those happen. Whenever we have needed to do something against those restricted actions, whether that be sell Kings Meadow, as an example, we have managed to do that even with those high parameters. And so I don't actually personally think that changing those parameters is a problem, i.e. that we should not do that. They're there to protect us. If we as a membership decide we want to change those, then that is for the membership to decide.
Okay, thank you. So Edward, anything to add?
Sorry, I was distracted by the Q&A. No, not really. In terms of restricted actions, it does protect the members' control of the club. There's a question about flexibility, but on fundamental issues, there should be a supermajority that's required to make fundamental changes.
Okay, thank you. So then I'll go Graham, Luke, and Tim.
Okay, yeah, first I should say I think it's quite a good thing, and there are a breadth of opinions on this, I believe, in the board, which is probably quite healthy. Personally, I think the restricted action is crucial. It's in our DNA, it's who we are. I think the fans are everything at this club. It's you know, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it's what Nick saw in us. That's why he got involved. He saw the Plough Lane Bond, the local action group, all the great stuff that our fans do. Our fans are amazing, and that's what we're all about. What more could you ask for than having these amazing set of fans that are the envy of the football world, I would say. And we need to protect that. And, you know, at the end of the day, you can only sell out once. So if we were to go below 75%, what happens next time we need a bit of money? We've lost control. We go down to, what, 51? People talk about the German model, which I think is irrelevant largely because they're protected by league rules and so forth. We've got our restricted action in place. It served us well. I think it continues to do so. Ultimately, obviously, it's up to the fans. If they don't want to own the club at some point, then we have to listen to them. The Dons Trust board ultimately are the servants of the fans. But for me personally, I think we've got to keep the restricted action. We've got to fight to protect it, and we've got to remain fan owned.
Okay, so Tim and Luke and Tim.
Good evening, everyone. This is very much my area. I was involved very close to the start of Supporters Direct, so I have experience nationally. I have a specific responsibility on the Dons Trust board, and we constituted a constitution working group back late last year, which gathered together a lot of expertise. I'm not a lawyer, but I know when things are right and when they're wrong. I personally believe that we should strengthen the restricted actions to ensure that in years to come that there's no scope for anyone doing the thing that we nowadays would not approve of.
Okay, thank you. And Luke. Okay, we may have lost Luke. Have we lost Luke? He's on mute.
There we go. That's better. Sorry. I thought Hannah was muting and I'm muting everybody, obviously not. So yeah, for me, fan ownership is our USP. 75% protects that. I think it protects us from people outside the organisation and also people within the organisation. And we need to ensure that we protect that as best as we can. And if we come to a time where we want to look at alternative models, whether that's 50 plus one, etc., then that's for the membership to decide, not for the board to decide and dictate to the membership or tell the membership. So I would always be in favour, and I think we are at a certain level now where we need maturity within the fan base to have that discussion. The time seems almost appropriate, going back to Plough Lane, to start having that discussion, because never again do I want to get to a point where fans feel that they're having a gun put to their heads.
Okay, thanks for that. So that sort of, you know, we've got time for basically, we've got another 10 minutes or so. We've got a few parish notices, but we can have some general Q&A. So I just want to pick up on one that came up much earlier and see if, and actually we had one that came in by email just, I think, earlier this evening that is also relevant, which is quite topical about whether, you know, there was somebody, I think Nigel's put something on there about the Black Lives Matter issue, but more specifically, there's a question earlier about whether we should ensure that we interview BAME candidates for managerial positions in the football club. So Joe, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So actually, it's actually a regulation now within the Football League that we do need to interview at least one BAME candidate. We certainly did last time round. So yeah, absolutely, it's something that's got to continue, and more than happy. You know, I think the issues within football have been that I certainly think that there isn't enough BAME candidates, and we want to see more. But obviously, I guess that will be, you know, there will be the motivation if they understand, if BAME candidates feel that there's more opportunities for them, and we have to ensure that we create that's a situation. So you know, absolutely, we will continue on that, and we will interview candidates on their experience and their credibility for the role, and have no issue whether that's a BAME candidate or not. Of course not.
Okay, great, thank you. So we're basically into general Q&A. So I'm just going to pick some, and actually, Hannah, feel free to shout some out from because I probably haven't seen them all, but actually quite a lot of interest in the semi-permanent stands and when people can see what they look like. I think we published pictures of them at some stage. Joe, can you remind us?
Yeah, there was one image, wasn't there? There was the image that shot from the north stand, sort of looking out towards the. You might remember it. It's got an actual scene. There's fans in the seats and there's players on the pitch. You've got the main stand on the right hand side of the image. That should give you a little bit more. Bit of an idea of what they will look like. We're happy to, maybe we could post that again tomorrow on the website for fans to have a look at, just to remind themselves. We are waiting for some more images of that, including what the seats will look like following our seat consultation. So hopefully we'll be able to put that out for everyone to see as well. But yeah, we don't have any, we haven't spent a lot of money on those kind of drawings because they are very costly. To get sort of 3D renders done, yeah, unfortunately we've had to limit what we can do there. We'd like to have done a lot more, but yeah, we'll post those again this week.
Okay, thanks. So the couple of questions about, so one's about the naming of the stadium, and then actually there's a question if Tom's still around and to fill in my gaps, that conversation we've had at the board recently about London living wage. Joe, is there a name for the stadium?
Other than Plough Lane, no, not at the moment. Some of you may know we were in discussions pre-COVID with a naming rights partner, and it was right down to the very last meeting with their board. They were very keen to move forward, and I will say literally 4 days later, COVID-19 kicked off, and it just sort of went south from there. So it's been very tough, and it continues to prove to be quite a tough environment, as you can all imagine. The situation isn't great in terms of potential sponsors. We hope that things will start to return some form of normality. There still is an opportunity for brands to get exposure, particularly, you know, in the circumstance that we're playing behind closed doors and there is more broadcasting. Yeah, it's a tough time. We're still looking, but at the moment, there isn't a naming rights partner in place at the moment.
Okay, so the question about London living wage, and I'm going to have a stab at it, and then hopefully Tom's still on the line. He can contradict me if I'm wrong, but broadly the picture is the club was paying London living wage. we've had a debate previously about whether it applied to everyone, whether there were some casual staff, incidental staff to whom it did or didn't apply. I think the London living wage went up at some point, and some of the people did therefore fall below the London living wage. The Don's Trust Board has discussed this over recent months. We haven't given up on our ambition here, but at the same time, we're about to move into a stadium, which in itself, the move of stadium, yes, we clearly hope it will generate new revenues, but it also generates somewhat, a less predictable cost base until you've been in it for a year or so. And we're talking about a financial environment which is really, really, really stretching. So I think what we agreed, but people will contradict me if I'm wrong, is that we wouldn't be saying, right, we're going to introduce it right now. We're going to see how the cost base unfolds over the next season, and take a view from there. On the grounds that to do it right now, given the really tight financial circumstances clubs are likely to be facing over the next 12 months, wouldn't be responsible. So, Tom, is there any more you want to add? And I know you did a lot of analysis on this.
No, you're right. I think because we're coming up to such an uncertain time financially, we decided to not implement London living wage across the board for the season from starting, whenever it starts, but normally August 2020, and we committed to have a look at this again ahead of the season following that starting in 2021. There's a bit of context when we've gone through the figures and done the work, and we were to apply London living wage across the board and become a London living wage accredited employer. The cost of that would be more than what we pay our highest paid player currently. So we're not talking small change. It will obviously therefore impact on our playing budget in a normal year. So that's what we need to take into consideration. It's not an easy way up, but we will review it next year when we have hopefully more of an idea on the running cost of the stadium and greater certainty over what income we will receive.
Brilliant, thank you. So I said we'd finish at 9. We've still got a parish notice or two to go. Actually, Hannah has a parish notice, and then I've got one. Hannah, can I hand over to you?
Yes. Quite simply, the fans voted for a new AFC Wimbledon badge, the club badge, which has been integrated now with the Don's Trust logo, and hopefully you will all notice that, and or not, just to let you know that that's a thing.
Great. Oh, sorry, are you going to show it on the screen or not?
No, sorry, I don't have it, but it should have been on the sign up for this today.
Fine. Okay, thank you for that. So then, I mean, the other parish or thing to say is that so we haven't had a formal SGM since I think it was early in the new year. Tonight isn't a formal SGM. There was no formal business to be transacted today. I know we haven't managed to answer everyone's questions, but it is a bit of an experiment, and it's probably, I don't know how it's come across at the other end. We've tried to give the best we can of the questions we've had, recognizing we can't answer all of them. If people feel it's gone well, interested to hear, we could do another one fairly soon and mop up some more questions if people would like that. We may be able to do an actual formal SGM online, and it's not entirely risk-free, and one has to take a view on various things under the Constitution, such as the meaning of the word venue and various dry stuff like that. We didn't do it that way today because there was no formal need to do formal business, but if we may have formal business soon. One thing I will just mention about when we do have a next SGM is that we will bring back to you one resolution from the previous SGM, which is on the annual report, which you approved at the January SGM on the proviso that there were no material changes, and we finalised the annual report and we sent it off to the FSA, our regulator. However, we will bring it back for formal approval. The reason for that is actually the numbers have barely changed at all, if at all. I mean, like really tiny changes to the numbers. But there was a statement in there from the auditors that I think will probably become increasingly seen in annual reports over the coming months, a sort of a COVID clause, if you like, which in relation to the going concern just pointed out in a COVID environment that there could be potential risks to that. I think that will become, a lot of annual reports will contain a COVID statement and qualification. Actually, it's not a qualification by the auditor. They're not qualified accounts, but there is a statement on that. So I think it's probably just good orders for us to bring that back to you, although the numbers are the numbers you approved. So we've done an hour and a half. I hope that was helpful. I hope it was informative. We look forward to seeing you in person as soon as we possibly can. We look forward to having a wonderful new stadium. We look forward to a football season. We look forward to another football season in League One, which is great news. And we look forward to seeing you all shortly. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you all. Stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.